Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Harif Zoom lecture. Harif, for those who don't know us, is the UK Association of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa, and we aim to raise awareness or to educate about the history, culture, and heritage of these Jews. My name is Lynn Julius, and I'm ably assisted by our technical whiz, Lawrence. We're a group of, a very small group actually, of volunteers. And we broadcast, if you call it that, broadcast every 2 weeks on average. We've got a website, www.harif.org. In order to receive details of our events, you have to be subscribed to the mailing list. So please do subscribe if you're not already there. We've got a sister website, which is a news blog, which is updated daily, and that keeps you up to date with all the current developments to do with Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. This session is being recorded, and the video will be uploaded to the Harif video channel in a few hours if we can get our act together. And please do take a moment to browse through our collection. It's quite an impressive collection, quite an archive, really, of recordings of talks on a whole variety of different topics. You will have an opportunity to make comments or write questions. Please do type them in the chat. So on to the subject of tonight's talk, which is, I'm very excited about it actually, and it's to do with a new book, which is called PAX Arabica. And this book looks into what the author calls the Arab Empire. What's the nature of this colonial empire? With its Palestinian vanguard, its dictatorial fragility, the oppression and expulsion of its minorities, and that is of particular concern to us, of course. Its denial of national self-determination. This book actually has had plenty of plaudits, and Einat Wilf, who's my personal heroine, called it an important work. And others have also had wonderful things to say about it. So our speaker tonight, who will present his book, is Daniel Clarke-Serret.
Hello.
And hi.
Hi.
Now, he is a UK barrister. He's also a school teacher. He's a linguist. And he is a poet and a prolific writer on his geopolitical substack, Guerre and Shalom, which I recommend to everybody. I've become a subscriber to this Substack, and it is fascinating. And he is prolific because you get a new article every day almost. So, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Daniel. Welcome and thank you very much for presenting your book tonight.
Thanks, Lynn. Real honor to be with you tonight, and thank you everyone for listening. And I'll begin when you feel I should.
Yes, please do.
Okay, thank you. Well, before I begin talking about this book, I think it's important to talk a little bit about who I am and how I came to write Pax Arabica, because then you can see where we're going, both with the book and with this talk. Now, I grew up in Reading, a very multicultural town in the south of England, and I had friends of all faiths and all religions, and I was openly Jewish in a diverse community. Indeed, I know what real peace is. In fact, I had very few what you would call waspish friends. Let me tell you a story which shows how this was the case. I worked in the Rural Payments Agency in central Reading, and It was a place with people who were Muslims, from the black community, Sikhs, and so on. And I was leaving for Israel for a careers program. Now, many people today particularly are worried about security. They're worried what you'll say if you mention the word Israel. So I said, in this very diverse environment, I was leaving for Israel. So what did they all say? That it was an apartheid state and all of this? Not at all. Most people were just thrilled that I was going somewhere for effectively a gap year. They said, you know, it's lovely. It's like going to Brazil. The people who commented specifically on Israel were more commenting on the biblical connections, and anyone who mentioned the conflict was more concerned about my safety than any political issues. There was only really one person who you could describe as Islamist, if I go by what he was wearing, and all he could do was shake my hand and say good luck, because in that environment, among those Muslims and around that community, it would have been highly inappropriate to do anything else. So I knew what peace was, what it meant, and that continued when I went into university. Many people who are interested in politics, they join the political party society, or perhaps they are keen members of their religious society. But I decided I believed in democracy, I believed in debate, so I joined and was a very important member of the debating society of UCL. I think it may even be the oldest debating society in Britain, and it's definitely one of them. And when I was there, it was the 175th anniversary. And as normal, every year there is an Israel debate or an Israel-related debate. And this was just after the Second Intifada. So we had the debate, and who was there on the panel along with me, who was organizing the debate? Well, we had a lady called Fatima, who was a barrister, a Palestinian barrister. We had Adam Ross, now Rabbi Adam Ross. And they knew each other, but they hadn't met each other for a long time before this debate, because when they were both at Birmingham University, they spent their time boycotting each other's societies. She was the head of the Palestine Society and he was the Jewish Society. And yet there, with them, with me, with the head of the Society for British Arab Understanding, with the typical kind of left-wing people you would get at university, we all, after this debate, which was conducted in a very friendly way, where Fatima actually abstained because she could not bring herself to support the Intifada, a violent uprising, a terrorist uprising. We went to the pub, and Adam was saying about how he was going to make Aliyah to Israel, and how he felt that there he could have a very, let's say, a more culturally Jewish life. And everyone was very understanding and really understood it. Again, I saw what peace meant in a very difficult political time with a diverse group of people. So that's where I come from. I know what peace is, I've seen peace. But then, of course, outside my life, it's been very different. In fact, it's been an utter frustration everywhere in terms of the ghettoization, the inability to debate. And of course, in our modern era, this has been exacerbated by social media, the echo chamber, and algorithms, which obviously conspire to divide people into camps. And so my life has been a journey to see how I could replicate what was needed to bring how I grew up to the reality of the world where that doesn't really exist in many other places. Now, a big formative experience for me was the Second Intifada, as I'm sure it was for many of you. As we all know, Israel was genuinely trying to make peace with a real and genuine offer of peace. And as we all know, it was met by Palestinian intransigence and violence. And year after year of terrorist bombings, suicide terrorism, and murder on a mass scale. And yet, instead of understanding that and understanding the background to that, the Western media seemed to take sympathy with the side who had rejected peace. And so that was an extremely formative experience. And what I've learned from that, until even today, is that there's complete failure to treat Palestinians as human beings with agency, the agency to take responsibility to make peace, the responsibility to treat human life with respect, the responsibility to compromise, to make counteroffers, to have their own peace plan. Basically, we live in this almost racist bubble where we treat them as children who cannot make decisions when they are completely capable of making peace, just as Fatima at the debate was capable of not supporting the Intifada. We've treated them as faceless totems who act in response to Israeli actions, to Western policy. Yet they are people who debate and people who have spoken to me. So what is it? What was the ingredient that was needed to break free of this violence and this rejectionism? And then we come to today, and we come perhaps to the greatest motivation to write this book. And it comes down to one word: genocide, or what I call the Great Genocide Blood Libel. We all know, and I'm not here to talk about politics in terms of specific events and specific policies, but we know that this claim is complete falsehood. We know that this has the lowest, in Gaza I'm talking about, has the lowest combatant to civilian death ratio in military history. That's not genocide. If that's genocide, then every war is genocide. Not even the firebombing of Tokyo by the Americans, or the bombing of Dresden by the British, or of course, the nuclear bombs. None of these things were genocide, let alone what we see in Gaza, which is a very low death ratio. And of course, all death is tragic. But this claim has been a complete lie, and it didn't even need to be substantiated or to have a prima facie case. It has been merely intended to downplay the Holocaust and equate Jews with the Nazis. Even debating it dignifies it with respect. And so I realized something, a key to the puzzle, a key to why there is no peace in the Middle East, which is the inversion of language. Essentially, every claim that is made against Israel is really a claim against the Arab world itself. Apartheid in Lebanon, where Palestinians don't even have the right to work or to work in certain professions, where people are categorized according to their confession and not according to their ability. And let's not forget female apartheid, which, from my own experience in Aix-en-Provence, extends very much into France. How about genocide itself? While they're busy accusing Israel of a forced genocide, what's happening in Sudan? What's happening with the forced Arabization and killings and murders of Africans in the Sudan? What's happening in Nigeria with the kidnapping of Muslims so that they will no longer be able to be safe in that place? This is being conducted as we speak. And let's talk about ethnic cleansing. And I don't even need to talk to this audience about that, because so many of you and so many of your lives have been ruined by this ethnic cleansing. And particularly in Iraq, one of the holy lands of Judaism, all the way back to the Babylonian exile. And yet it's gone from one of the most important lands of Judaism, the land of the Talmud, the land of Abraham, to being a land empty of Jews, where Jews face Nuremberg laws. They faced the prospect of real genocide. And so we see that every accusation against Israel has been subject to what I call language inversion. But perhaps the greatest of all, the greatest inversion of all, isn't even genocide. It's the one of settler colonialism. Because whilst Israel is an indigenous people in the very first nation state in the world, in the region where nation statehood was created, in that land, in a land of empires, the Arabs themselves are the greatest empire and the most nefarious empire we currently see on the face of the earth. To understand that, and I am going to be dealing with all the possible critiques of that analysis, we would do well to remind ourselves of the story of the Tower of Babel in the Bible. Now, it is at first a very curious story, is it not? Because there, at the beginning of the story, there's peace. Everyone is working together. All the builders are working with one language, one way of doing things. And they are all together on one project. That's peace, is it not? And yet God comes down, splits them into 70 nations. So we ask ourselves, what is the point of that story? Why did God disperse the builders? Why did he do away with peace? Well, this is the peace of the Arab Empire. It is, if you want, peace, Pax Arabica, but it is peace through totalitarianism, through utter unity. It's not the peace of the biblical tradition. It is the Babel terror, with one language, one ideology, one religion, one way of doing something, enforced at the butt of a gun. And so that is not our way. That's not the biblical way, where we believe in different nations with different perspectives living together in peace. What I saw in Reading at the UCL Debating Society, but certainly not in the Arab Empire. Peace isn't the absence of war, but learning, innovating. In the words of Pirkei, the Ethics of the Father, learning from every person. Now, of course, the Arab world is not at peace. And of course, outside its borders, in Northern Nigeria, for example, in Sudan, it brings terror, as all empires do at their borders. But if it were bringing peace, it would be the wrong peace. It would be one borderless space with one language and homogenized culture. And I would like to emphasize that when I speak of the empire, I understand that there have been empires in the Middle East since time immemorial, and that there have been Islamic empires since the 7th century. But we all know that this problem has got worse and intensified in the 20th century with the mixing of Western ideas. We know that even in Iraq, at the beginning of the 20th century, there was a very diverse polity there. In Syria, in Lebanon, which was conceived of as a Christian state, in Egypt with the Copts. But bit by bit, diversity has been reduced, minorities have been targeted. And so we see something very particular about the 20th century, something that is making this Arab empire catalyze to even worse goals. And we see that it culminated with Nasser, in Nasser's expansionism. There was a time when there were kings and things weren't perfect, but there was a degree of diversity. But what we saw, and Anthony Eden saw it in the Suez Crisis, that here was a man doing exactly what had happened before in Europe. What Hitler had done in Europe, Nasser was doing to the Middle East, to bring the fall of monarchies from Iraq to intended in Jordan, his Vietnam in Yemen, his trying to bring down of the Lebanese state, his unification with Syria, and yes, the attempt of real genocide in Israel. And there are the notes of British officers which prove it. They wanted to kill everyone. And this shows us that whenever I'm talking about the Arab Empire, and that has existed in some form for many centuries, we're really talking about the 20th century, since it's mixed with Nazism, since it's mixed with Marxism. And together, it has created this new terror. Now, let's now move on to say, some people may object to what I've said. They may say, well, how is the Arab world an empire? Surely there are states. I'm not here to deny there are states, okay? But a nation and a state is not the same thing. Just to give you an example, in the Victorian times, when Friedrich Nietzsche wrote the book Beyond Good and Evil, he spoke of 4 nations: France, Germany, England, and the Jews. And of those nations, only one was a nation state, France. England was a nation within a larger state of Britain. Germany, until very recently before he wrote the book, had been a collection of Germanic states, all separate and divided. And the Jews, of course, were a nation without a state. Benjamin Disraeli, of course, said how proud he was to be part of the so-called Jewish race, which in the terms of the time, he meant the Jewish nation. So you had a leader of the British state being proud to be a member of the Jewish nation. Clearly, that's not the same thing. And yes, of course, there are states in the Arab world, but they are sanjaks. They are the leftovers of the effective equivalent of the Turkish Ottoman administrative districts. They're not nations. They don't have a story, a solidarity, a sense of the past and shared future. Their leaders don't pursue a national interest. They pursue the interest, the wider interest of what they would call the Arab nations, and I would call the Arab Empire. Now, many Arab leaders have been brave and they've tried to pursue the interest of their own country, but they have done so often at the cost of their life. Anwar Sadat, of course, was assassinated. And even today, we see how when MBZ or MBS speak of peace with Israel or normalization in the case of the United Arab Emirates, they are responded to as having caused a stab in the back, which of course reminds us of the language after the First World War, okay, which equally caused its own problems. And so those leaders, even if they want to pursue a national interest, even if they wish to create a nation state in those territories, they are not able to, because the Arab Street, which is the real backbone of this empire, will not allow it. In fact, many people speak of the Arab world as if it's not a democracy. Unfortunately, it is a democracy because the leaders cannot dictate. They are dictated to by their people, and if they go against it, they will pay with their lives. So what are the Palestinians in this? Now, we must talk, before I say this, we must make a distinction between what they are now and what they could become. What they are now is a vanguard, not a nationality. Now, I'm not saying, this is not hyperbole, this is not me trying to be controversial. These are the words of their very own charter, which, first of all, in the first article, talks about the Arab nation, the Arab this, the Arab that. You go and look at it. It talks about the Arab nation. It doesn't talk about a Palestinian nation. And later on, it says, we must safeguard our Palestinian identity, quote, at the present stage of the struggle. And also, quote, that they are the vanguard of what they call the Arab nation, read empire. So when we see this in terms of how their actions have played out. Of course, if they wanted a state, there have been many opportunities to do so, from 1937 to with Ehud Barak to 2008 with Ehud Olmert. But why have they not done so? Because they are clinging to this imperial dream. Now, many are quick to say this is to do with Islam, and I'm sure it has its role and intensifies it. But we must be clear that this applies also to secular Palestinians. In a foreshadowing of the October the 7th massacre, there was an event not too dissimilar in 1978 called the Coastal Road Massacre, when then the secular Palestinians from Lebanon, where they were busy destabilizing the country, decided to make a sudden invasion, if you will, into Israel. The intention was again to take hostages. The intention again was to derail peace. As October the 7th scuppered normalization with Saudi Arabia, so the Coastal Massacre was conceived to scupper peace with Egypt. They failed. The peace did happen with Egypt, though, as we have said, Sadat paid with his life. And so what we see is here, again, as with October the 7th, they also went around massacring people. In that case, when they couldn't get what they want with the hostages, they showed a complete contempt for human life. So there's something here that goes beyond mere religion. This is something that animates the Arab populace. Now, as I said, this is saying what the Palestinians are, not what they could be. And in chapter 19 of the book, I talk about a country called Levantia. I dream the dream. And if we got talk later, I will talk about this. But just to say, we are talking here about a nation that is free of the Arab Empire and which is a genuine nation state. Now, when we talk about the Arab Empire, we will talk in a minute about the problems it poses for the minorities, which of course is my greatest concern. But let us be clear, it's not exactly wonderful for the Arabs themselves. We see in Egypt a country which is in the grip of economic crisis. We have a country where there is no wealth creation. We have a country where the army rules the state in its own interest, and where the military class are put above all. We see vanity projects in its new administrative capital, the biggest this, the biggest that, Freudian issues on a grand scale. But beyond that army capture of the economy, which we also see in Iran with the IRGC, we see that there is just simply a lack of innovation. Why? Because they have a very different attitude than we have in a nation state. In their imperial mindset, they have the truth, okay? We, at least when we're at our best in the West, which we are unfortunately not at the moment, we have truth as an attitude. We don't know what the truth is, we don't have it in our pocket, but we strive for it, and we strive for it through the interplay of ideas. But if you believe that Arabism is this great nation, you want, to coin a phrase, to make Arabia great again. And so underpinned by the truths of Islam, even if you are secular, you wish to make your country great, and you don't need to innovate. You don't need to listen to anyone else. What you need to do is get rid of those outside influences which you can hold responsible, and the minorities which you can hold responsible. So faced with complete and terminal decline in Egypt, what do they turn to? Do they turn to debate and innovation? Do they turn to Western-style democracy? No, of course not. They turn to Islamism. And Islamism is saying, well, we haven't gone far enough. We haven't done enough to restore the greatness of the past. What we need is the complete Babel terror. What we need is the complete invasion of Islam into every angle and every nook and cranny of our lives. What we need is a complete distinction between the house of virtue and the house of sin. And we will basically purge anyone who doesn't have this view, Muslim or not Muslim. And when we are faced with that, the Arabs themselves face disaster as a culture, as an economy. But most of all, it brings disaster on the minorities. And perhaps we see this most starkly in Syria. Now, many people have a comic book view of Syria. They saw the Assad regime, which I want to say at the outset was a monstrous regime that murdered and maimed and tortured with impunity. But people don't ask a more basic question. Why was it that the Alawites had to take power in the first place? What was the need? We have partly answered this question because we saw, of course, what happened in Egypt, what happens to minorities, what happened in Iraq, where there almost are no minorities, except for in the Kurdish north. And so they and all the minorities, the Christians, the Kurds, the Druze, they had, of course, the Alawites, they had to think to themselves, well, what are we going to do to survive? What are we going to do to stop the Babel terror? And they had a few choices. They could do as many as you have done, which is to flee to the west. They could, of course, stand and fight like the Kurds. They could try and be subservient and dwindle like the Christians. They could get outside protection like the Druze. Or they could try and take power like the Alawites. They reasoned the only way to stop the Sunni Arab Muslim imperialist mentality was to take power themselves. When you think about it, this was the greatest tragedy of them all. And why does it happen? It happens because of perhaps the greatest inversion, the issue of self-determination. Now, self-determination is a very important idea. I believe in it fully. Self-determination means freedom. But the question is, freedom for whom? Is it freedom for territories, or is it freedom for people? Now, the idea of decolonization has got a bit confused. People associate it with European colonialism. They believe that all we need to do is get rid of the French or the British or the Americans from a territory, and then we're free. So now, because Syria has no French people in it, therefore it is free. That's complete nonsense. It may have been decolonized in the legalistic sense, but it has not been decolonized because there is not the most important thing of all, which is self-determination and freedom. Indeed, whereas before, Alawites and Christians and Druze and Kurds, who all have their own traditions, and in the case of Alawites and Christians and Druze, their own religion, okay, they were free to do that under the French, and they're not free now. So in fact, decolonization has brought reduced self-determination. So we need to ask ourselves, what does self-determination mean? And here we come to the greatest of the greatest of the greatest of the language inversions used by Arab imperialism. The question that is asked by all and that has affected the West, that Israel, the indigenous nation of the Middle East, has no right to exist. This is language inversion because one thing is sure, Syria and Iraq have no right to exist. Not a little bit. Now, to understand why, we need to understand what self-determination means, and it means of individuals, not of majorities, not of those who can win power because of their might, not those who can even win elections because of their might. Self-determination means that all are free in their indigenous homelands to flourish, to live, to follow their religion, to be diverse in the greatest diverse region that there once was in the world. Now, at the moment, there is no self-determination in Syria. So Syria has no right to exist. Now, we are faced with the UN, and the UN says that Syria is free. The UN says that the borders of Syria are inviolable. They say that when Israel intervenes on behalf of the Druze, that they are breaching self-determination and the self-determination of Syria. This is complete nonsense, because self-determination is actually being protected because the borders won't do it for them. What we see is that there is no self-determination because the borders are wrong and because it is infected by Arab imperialism. And the last holdouts that we particularly see in Lebanon and Syria are doing their best to hold it off. We're not saying that everyone makes the right choices, but the Alawites, who are not Muslims at all, they're actually more akin to Christianity, they don't pray in mosques, they felt the need to go to evil to survive in the Middle East. That tells us a lot about what it means to live in that place. Now, this tells us we need to view international law completely differently. Okay, we need to understand that we need to use force to protect self-determination until we can alter borders and remove Arab imperialism to do it for us. International law has been seen as the follows. Don't get involved in other countries unless they physically attack you. This is not the case. So let's take, for example, the Iranian case. I'm going to just concentrate for the moment on the 12-day war. Was that a breach of international law? Well, what's the purpose of international law? Self-determination, freedom. And what is the most undeniable part of self-determination? The right to survive. What is the opposite of surviving? Being the victim of nuclear weapons. There can be nothing more clearly in line with international law, however limited one sees it, than to destroy the proliferation of nuclear weapons. And on the same token, if the Druze have no way to survive except for Israeli intervention, then that is in line with international law. It is purely the existence of Syria and the existence of Iraq that are against international law. But of course, the West doesn't see it that way. The West appeases. Why? Well, of course, the West, or what we're calling, let's say the Christian West, also is part of the might equals right mentality. Whoever dominates numerically a region has the right to decide. We, the minorities, say that that is rubbish, dangerous rubbish. We say that what matters is the individual person. To say otherwise is to show why utilitarianism is a failed and wrong philosophy. We need to think about what is often the counterexample to utilitarianism, which is the greatest good for the greatest number of people, which is called the sheriff example. Well, imagine you have people rioting in the town and the sheriff has no choice. The only way he can stop the rioters is to hand over the innocent man, the man he knows is the innocent man. What does he do? Some people, especially if they're called Pedro Sanchez, would say, hand over the innocent man to the protesters, then we'll stop the riots, because they're dominant there and I want to be dominant here. We say no, that is appeasement. Now, not every Western leader has been an appeaser. Someone whose name I want to remove from the dust is Anthony Eden, okay, who's actually on the front of the book. Now, the Suez Crisis has been completely misunderstood. I'm not going to go into detail now, but you're very welcome to read chapter 12 of the book. But what was the Suez Crisis really about? It's not about the end of the British Empire, okay? That's what it absolutely isn't about, right? Anthony Eden, as the Foreign Secretary, allowed independence in Sudan in 1954. Indeed, the problem they faced was not the British leaving Sudan. The problem was getting Muslims to abandon the slave trade, which of course is still very much a problem there today, with streets in Khartoum named after slave traders and with black people in Sudan called by the most outrageous names like slaves. It's not about that. In fact, it's Anthony Eden withdrew even from the zone between Israel and Cairo. All that this was about was not about British imperialism. It was about protecting against Arab imperialism. He saw, as we should all have seen, that in the Second World War, we appeased Mussolini. And where did that lead us? We appeased Hitler. Where did that lead us? He was one of the few brave people who stood up against this and resigned in the House of Commons. And then, when it came to 1956, he said, no, we're not going to have Hitler again. We're not going to have someone who spreads totalitarianism and a totalitarian empire over a whole continent, destroying minorities, destroying freedom in its wake. And he said, no, and not only him and not only me, even, believe it or not, the head of the UN said that Nasser was like Hitler. It was a common viewpoint. Of course, the Americans betrayed us. What a surprise. Just like they betrayed the Kurds now in Iraq and Syria as well. That's obviously their modus operandi, and they were in Cold War thinking. But I'm sorry, Eisenhower is not going to get the last laugh here, because this was an attempt to keep waterways open, to have freedom of trade, and to protect minorities. Indeed, it was seen that where prior to the Suez Crisis, Eden had withdrawn from the Sinai Desert and reduced and removed the British zone, except for in the Suez Canal, what happened? The Fedayeen attacks against Israel. And so what we see is this is not about European colonialism. This is about Arab colonialism imposed by language inversion and protected by appeasement. Now, when we see this, when we actually open our eyes to the truth, and then we see how things need to change, we see the path to peace. And there's a difference between now and the end goal. Now, the answer is strength. Okay, and just imagine a psychological experiment which has been done many times. Imagine you had 10 euros or $10 or 10 pounds, and you had to split it, and only you could decide how to split that money. So you say to the other person, you could say, I'm going to have 9 euros, you have 1 euro. And they've got a choice. They either accept the 1 euro or they reject it and no one gets any money. What does the logic tell us to do? The logic tells us to accept the $1, because of course $1 is better than nothing. But human nature isn't like that. No one wants to be taken as a mug. So people who have done this psychological experiment always offer nearly half because they know it will be rejected. But unfortunately, Israel has generally been the mug, and it's accepted $1 every single time. It said, we will release 1 hostage and you can release 1,000 terrorists. They made the equivalent of 1 baby to 1,000 thugs. And this has not gone unseen. But what we have seen since October the 7th, and we can quibble about individual policies, but what we have seen is they're not going to accept $1 anymore. They're only going to accept $5. And this works, and I give plenty of examples in the book. The Scottish Highlands, the Old West, where people had to take very violent action in order to never have to take it again. When there was any disrespect, they always dealt with it harshly. But why? So there would be peace. Because when you're in a Wild West environment, and the Middle East is an Old West environment where there is no law, strength is peace, a cold peace, but a peace nonetheless. But of course, we don't want to end there, because that is not the peace of the Rural Payments Agency. That is not the peace of the UCL Debating Society. So how do we get there? Well, there's going to need to be a paradigm shift, and it's happened before. Well, could you imagine if you lived in the Persian Empire or the Eastern Roman Empire prior to Islam, at each other's throats constantly? You would never have imagined that within a few small years, you would have been, ironically, at peace under the Islamic Empire, which consumed them all. But take near our own time. Let's talk about the USA and UK. We were enemies. We fought. People don't realize in 1814, the America wanted to invade Canada because annexing Canada is very popular and has always been so in American history. But of course, the British stopped that. And so that's just one example of the great animosity between the two nations. And indeed, as you can see, I'm not exactly enamored by President Eisenhower. However, there has been peace. There's been a paradigm shift through many reasons. George Washington resigning his commission and not becoming a tyrant like Julius Caesar, as in so many republics. Through after the war, George III accepting the result and saying to John Adams, we would have wished it was different, but we accept the way it is. Do you know something? The Palestinians have never done that. The Arabs have never done that. So That paradigm shift would be the decolonization of indeed the Arab mind. I'm going to give you a vision. Do I see this vision happening? Who knows? At the moment, it's hard to see. But we must believe there is a future because I have seen it in my own life. We must believe there is a future because in Aix-en-Provence, I met real Arab women who were really oppressed, who were singers who couldn't sing in Saudi Arabia and Iran, who couldn't have the boyfriends of their choice. And they lived a living hell even in France, a Western country. So what's the vision? I'm not standing here, despite the polemical nature of the book, I'm not standing here even in what I would describe as a right-wing position. What I'm saying is, I'm okay with two states, but I believe in the post-imperial two-state solution. What does that mean? The post-imperial two-state solution means the Palestinians, or as I would call them, the Levantians, will no longer see themselves as being part of an Arab imperial construct. They won't see them, in their own words, as being the vanguard of that construct. They will see themselves as a Mediterranean people. They'll have a new flag with a blue line at the top and a blue line at the bottom, just like Israel, and just with, in the middle, a yellow strip, which is a nod to their desert origins. I will see that they will see a Mediterranean future because that is peace. The obstacle to peace, the obstacle to female freedom in the Arab world, the obstacle to Egyptian innovation, the obstacle to survival in Iraq, the obstacle to stopping the Alawites having to take power and become monsters. The obstacle is Arab imperialism. And when that comes to an end, we can change. You will say, is that possible? Are the British people the same as before? Anything is possible. We will be hard, we will be strong until it happens, and we will have the olive branch when it's needed. And here we see, and here we finish, and we say, how is it that the British Empire is different to the Arab Empire? In so many ways. They shared something. They shared this desire of adolescent boys, the T. Lawrences, who wanted to escape the rule of law. They wanted to escape the reality of life in a society bound by rules, and they wanted to create their own fairy tale world in Lord Cromer's Egypt, in India. They wanted to feel like heroes, like Lawrence did in Arabia. That too is the dream of all these Arab adventurers who go to Nigeria and go to the frontiers and kick gays off roofs in Gaza and impose the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. But there is a difference. Cromer and all of these, they had a place called home. They had a parliament that was looking over their shoulder. They had people in England who were critical of what they were doing and demanded supervision. They had a nation state behind them, a state of eyes, even though Cromer wanted to be part of this collective we. While the imperialists want to be part of history, to be on the crest of history, to be in Hegel's history, big H history, where you are on this wind and you're taken away in the great direction that history will bring you. England said no. He said, we are eyes. We are a nation of eyes. And that took us from that place to this place where we are now. But unfortunately, the Arabs don't have a nation state. They don't have those people who are saying no. They don't have those commissions of inquiry. And so the administrative massacres don't stop. So the conversions don't stop. We need a complete change of mentality. And perhaps before you say this is all a dream, that we cannot get to the Rural Payments Agency, that we can't get to the UCL Debating Society, I'm just going to read you from this book, from the chapter I wrote about Islamism. This is Voltaire. This is Voltaire in the 18th century in England. He'd come from France. He'd come from an absolutist monarchy where there was no freedom of speech, where there was no tolerance, where there was no freedom. And he came to a place in England where there was freedom. This is what he said. and I believe that every Arab should listen to it. Take a view of the Royal Exchange in London, a place more venerable than many courts of justice, where representatives of all nations meet for the benefit of mankind. There, the Jew, the Mahometan, that means the Muslim, and the Christian transact together, as though they all professed the same religion, and give the name of infidel to none but bankrupts. There, the Presbyterian confines in the Anabaptist, and the churchman depends on the Quaker's word. He continued, if only one religion were allowed in England, the government would possibly become arbitrary. If there were but two, the people would cut one another's throats. But as there are such a multitude, they all live happily and in peace. That was Muslims, Jews, Christians. That was 300 years ago. And I will finish with this. This is the end of that chapter, which shows you that Levantia isn't the dream you may believe it is. In those old English days, the Mahometan, the Muslim, transacted with those of all faiths. In those old English days, the Mahometan found wealth with the Jew in commerce. In those old English days, the Mahometan found peace with the Jew in trade. In those old English days, the Mahometan found peace and happiness with all when transacting in the presence of complete religious diversity. And perhaps that's the secret. Perhaps that's why the Muslim world has declined. The route to Islamic recovery is not freedom from oppression through mass oppression. Neither is it holding fast to the imperial vision. Rather, it is the embrace of peace through religious diversity underpinned by freedom of trade. We can only hope that such a change is coming, that the Muslim world will become great again, and we will cheer its advance. In those days to come, totalitarian Islamism will be no more. It will be replaced with a fearless return to 18th century Anglo freedom, where the Jew, Muslim, and Christian dwell in peace. May it come soon and in our days. Inshallah. Thank you.
Oh, wow. That was fabulous. Thank you very much for an excellent presentation. I think a refreshingly different one, different to what we usually hear. I do hope, inshallah, it would come to pass. But I can see two main problems there. One is you say that most of the Arab states are not really, don't have a story. They're not really a nation. So, I mean, if one were to dismantle the Arab Empire, you know, all these states would disintegrate, wouldn't they? What was the other thing was yeah. What about Islam? Because Islam, by its very nature, would want to dominate. So this vision of kind of interfaith diversity, how could it ever happen um, if Islam does not respect other religions in the same way as we might do in the West? So how about
Okay.
that for starters?
Okay, fair enough. Okay, well, first of all, states would fall apart. Well, in some cases, good, because Syria has no right to exist and Iraq has no right to exist. What I'm saying here, and is very simple. A state may have a historical legitimacy, and I say that Israel is an indigenous state in an indigenous region. But at the end of the day, especially in the post-Second World War era, what we're after is people being able to live. Okay, and if that means that the UN borders have to go, good, because they're clearly the wrong borders. It's clear that a state where the Alawites cannot live without dominating others is a state which has no future and deserves no future. And it's not about allotting blame, it just has to go. But the other point is, states fall apart because they don't innovate. How are they going to innovate? Through diversity, through Voltaire's vision. Well, if they choose to get rid of all their minorities, then naturally they're going to fall behind all those countries where they are welcoming people from other countries. Think about how much we in Britain have benefited from yourself, from all the people who are listening who've come from the Middle East, and how much they are suffering. You know, sometimes we reap what we sow, but there are, even today, Arab states who have got their national vision, they're not falling apart. Morocco, Now, Morocco is a genuine nation state. In fact, I would say it's the only independent state of Pax Arabica. It nominally is part of the Arab League, but very much nominally. In fact, I think Morocco may even have been the first nation to recognize America. I might be wrong, so don't quote me on it. But Morocco has decided that it's going to prioritize Western Sahara. Okay, and I make no comments on the issue, but it's prioritizing its native interests over Palestine. So it's, by doing that, it's put the national interest first. Now, is Morocco falling apart? I think you'll find that even extremists in Morocco are probably going, hurrah, that they're getting Western Sahara. So, you know, there is there a very clear model. And about Islam dominating. Well, of course, you'll know I call this book Pax Arabica, not Pax Islamica. And we have seen that there are many countries outside the Arab Empire where Islam is just part of the mix. You know, Iran is a mixture of Islam, but also the traditions of Zoroastrianism. Indeed, that's probably where they get some of their black and white thinking from, to be honest. And you see that in Indonesia, which is the biggest Muslim country. And so in those countries, Islam takes a relatively more private space compared to it does in the Arab world. And why is it that we see problems now in places like Pakistan, even increasingly in Indonesia, and especially in Iran? It's because of Arabism. Because, and I don't know if many people know this, that the Ayatollah Khomeini, he actually was the person who translated Milestones, which was Qutb's book, which was the foundation of Islamism, or one of them. So even though he is a Persian by ethnicity, he's an Arab by theology. And indeed, in these countries, we're seeing Pakistani headscarves being replaced by Arab headscarves and hijabs. So it is the Arabization of these countries that is the problem, because the Arabs haven't found another way, which is in Islam, because that's what made them great. But look, it's not for me to tell them what Islam is, but I am going to tell them this: we're going to survive.
Right. Actually, Richard Galbert more or less makes my point, which is that the problem is that most, if not all, Muslim states have the Quran as the basis of their constitutions. So any attempt to engender change within Muslim and Arabs have to contend with the Quran, which dictates everything that is done. Change becomes almost impossible as a result.
But can I just say one thing, Lynn? Although I'm not going to comment on Islam theology, because I don't have to, because I see that the greatest issues have happened in the 20th century. If you imagine the amount of time that elapsed between the 7th century conquests and the 1930s in Iraq, huge amount of time. Of course, it was not all fun for the people who were living there, but the diversity survived. And then in a very short period of time, it didn't. And I think we need to actually remember that it's not just Islam, but it's the fusion of Islam with Western ideas. Because, for example, and I'm going to give again the example of Khomeini. Again, Khomeini was a student of Qutb, but he was also a student of Plato. And he was a big fan of Plato. And people don't think of this. Why is it the Islamic Republic? I repeat, why is it the Islamic Republic? Why is there a guardian council of jurists? I repeat, why is there a guardian class of jurists? Could it not be that this Islamic Republic is based on Greek philosophy combined with Islam? It definitely isn't Shia Islam, because Shia Islam always was against the legitimacy of the state, which is why there was always a separation between the priests and the kingly class. And yet somehow that was turned on its head when they read a bit of Plato, they looked at a bit of Hitler, and they imbibed a bit of Marx. I think we are also part of the problem.
Right. So I'll be devil's advocate for a second.
Yeah.
You mentioned Morocco as one of the more kind of integral Muslim states or Arab states. What about the Amazigh minority? I mean, in a way, Morocco only exists at the expense of the suppression of their Amazigh minority. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I agree with that. But I have to also say that when I been to Morocco, you struggle to find anyone there who says they're Arab, to be completely honest with you. The tour guide and everyone don't say that they're Arab. And they are speaking their own language, and the tour guide speaks their own language. And I'm not here to defend Morocco as some model state, but there clearly is almost indescribable difference between Morocco, where you and me can go on holiday quite happily and speak to people about this quite openly, and Syria and Iraq and all these monstrosities which are not nations. So I think we have to give a little bit of credit where credit's partly due.
Okay. Right. And what about the Abraham Accords? What do you see? I mean, is there a possibility that more states might join the Abraham Accords and this, and you know,
Okay.
we
I'm
would
going to
have
say
a
something a little bit
solution in that sense?
Okay. This is what I have to say about the Abraham Accords. At the moment, it's a little bit of an elite-driven project. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier about the nature of states in the Arab world. So, for example, I think we would all agree that the UAE leadership is doing its very best. It's open to synagogues there, for example. It's separated itself from the Arab League. It's placed the emphasis on the GCC. It has been aligned with Israel in terms of countries like Somaliland. Another example, I not mentioned it, but another example of an Arab state which oppresses minorities and is not allowing freedom of a real state there. But anyway, leaving that aside, but has support for the Abraham Accords in the UAE ever passed 30%? I think the biggest place is in Morocco, where it has reached the 30%. But still, it's an elite project. Why? It's not because of the leaders. There are some awful leaders in the Arab world, but some of them actually want to pursue the national interest. The question isn't whether they want to pursue the national interest. The problem is democracy, in inverted commas, that they are listening to the people and they have no choice. They don't want to end up like Sadat. I mean, you know, I look at someone like Assad and I think, did this eye doctor who grew up in Britain, did this guy really want to be the head of this regime? No. Honestly, I just cannot see it. So I really believe that these things, the Abraham Accords, is a bit of an elite project. Now, is it a good thing? Yes. Because, of course, at the moment, they have at least a common enemy, and an even more common enemy since Iran has been bombing them. But we also must not fool ourselves. The reason the Abraham Accords have reached the stage they have is because of the psychology of strength. Not because Israel's been nice, but because Israel has been a little bit brutal. And that's what's brought it about. And also, in the UAE, the most successful, perhaps, example is because of trade, embracing Voltaire's vision. So that, if anything, shows us the way to go. So to be honest, I'm not really bothered whether Libya joins the Abraham Accords. What I want is freedom for minorities in those spaces. I want people to be able to go back to Libya if they so choose and not be harassed as they were when this gentleman from France returned to just build a synagogue. One Jew, one example of diversity was too much for the imperialists.
Absolutely. Julian Barnett, actually, nice to hear from you, Julian. He has a question. Surely Egypt is a nation state irrespective of its recent Arab history. Is that right?
Surely Egypt is a nation state. Well, are they seeing the ancient Egyptians? Are they the same people? Are they seeing themselves as part of their national story? Or would they agree with Qutb, an Egyptian? Would they agree with Albana, an Egyptian? And all of these members of the Muslim Brotherhood, that everything outside Islam is falsehood. Now, if they do, I'm not sure what pride they will be taking in their ancient past. And indeed, we see it with the Christians, who are kind of the descendants of ancient Egyptians, the Copts, the native people who are there. Well, they're not true. They are stopping them building churches. They're oppressing them. They have absolute contempt for the indigenous people that came from Egypt. Of course, they use the tourist industry. I understand that. But they see themselves as the head of the Arab world, and they jolly well are.
Okay. So we met actually at a Kurdish event. And I want to know what your idea, what are the prospects for the Kurds, would you say? I mean, are they going through a terribly bad patch now? Is there any hope that they might get their own nation state?
Well, obviously, I'm not actually, Joe, I'm not going to answer that question in terms of geopolitics, because what I want to answer that question is in terms of us. Because when it comes to this whole situation, the question isn't what other people believe, it's whether we accept it. Okay? There are people on the internet who believe the earth is flat. No one believes them, so it's a harmless belief. But people do believe, for example, that the Palestinians genuinely are searching for a state and deserve one, and we accept it. So that's the difference. It's not what people are giving, it's what we're doing in the West, what we're doing in the powerful countries, what the Chinese are doing, right? Who I can't imagine are all in favor of Islamic extremism. In fact, I'm absolutely certain that they're not. So the question is, what are we doing? Now, I'm going to say this. America leads the Western world. And that's a little bit of a problem, because America has the, and I'm sorry to our American listeners, but America often has the attention span of a 5-year-old child. It's going to change the world in Afghanistan, then it withdraws. It's going to change the world in Iraq, it withdraws. It's going to arm the Kurds because it needs them in Iraq, and then it withdraws. It's going to be with Eden in Egypt, and then it's going to let the pound sink unless we withdraw. You see, the old empires, they basically went places and stayed there. And that, you can like it or you lump it, but what it definitely did was it meant that there wasn't as much of a flare-up. But because basically America is not consistent in its support of the Kurdish people, it uses them to fight against Saddam. It uses them to, all right, we're going to use you as a ground force to fight against Iran. Sorry, the first one was Iraq. This was Iran. We're going to use you in Syria to against Assad and against the Islamic State. But then as soon as it's achieved its objectives, it walks away. How are they meant to survive when they don't get our support? There is a people there that deserves our support. And we are so much more powerful than the countries that surround it, that are racked by division and violence and inflation. The so-called all-powerful Turkish state is really just in the second league to Zimbabwe in terms of economic management. And yet we can't support them. We can't even stand up to Russia, a country which has the GDP of Italy. Okay, there is no will. Okay, and hopefully the point of organizations like us is to say, look, there are real people in Kurdistan, in Somaliland, in Israel, amongst the Druze people, amongst the Christians in Lebanon who actually signed a peace deal with Israel. People don't actually know that, but that's true, who actually do want to live in peace, who do want freedom in their indigenous lands. And we need to grow up, okay, a little bit and stop having this short-termist, algorithm-based American view of, we can just turn up for 2 minutes, okay? And so there's going to have to be a change of American attitudes. I'll leave it to you whether that's likely.
Right, we've got a few comments here. Ariel doesn't agree with the Abraham Accords, and it could, he's something about the dhimmis. It doesn't trust them, basically. And Richard Galber mentions the Hamas Charter, which belongs to a particular strain of Islam. So all these things are, I mean, these are the naysayers saying we can't have, the Arab Empire is not going to disintegrate anytime soon, or shall we say the Islamic Empire, I suppose.
Okay, yeah. Well, is it going to disappear anytime soon? No, and I'm not here to say it will. I'm trying to say that anything's possible. But as I say, what we're trying to say here is not that. We're trying to actually say grown-up ways of dealing with it. So grown-up ways of dealing with it is, first of all, to actually recognize this is a wider problem than Islam. That it's a wider and a narrower. It's wider because it involves secular PLO terrorists on 1978 doing Hamas-style massacres in Israel. It is narrower because it is also been very highly influenced in the 20th century by Western ideologies, and it's been a very poisonous mix. So completely, dimitude, subservience has been a horrific thing. But we also must understand something, that Islam actually has evolved a little bit. In the beginning of Islam, for example, they didn't want converts. There were too many converts because, they only taxed the non-Muslims. So when people started converting to Islam, it was a big problem for their tax collection. Also, they needed people of other religions. They needed the Christians Christian heretics, according to the Byzantine Church, but the Christians, in inverted commas, in Egypt, to do their navy work. How were desert people going to fight the Byzantines? Well, they needed people of other religions. And many people came to Islam because it was just easier. We all know that Judaism is very, very demanding in terms of ritual. We know that Christianity is very demanding in terms of, well, you have to forgive everyone and so forth. Islam is relatively speaking easy. So it attracted, for example, Zoroastrians, whose faith had been destroyed by the fall of the Persian Empire. So Islam has changed over time, and it's always had an attitude of superiority, and so has Catholicism. Okay? But there's a difference between Catholicism and Islam, and then the absolute ethnic cleansing of Iraq. There is a step change of difference. And so we can't just say Islam. We have to say modernity mixed with Islam, which is a very different thing. And I think people have to get this absolutely clarified. But also, in terms of trusting people, let's just deal with the issue of trust. Don't come into trust. Let me just tell you a story from the Muslim beginnings. When Abu Bakr in the Ridda Wars decided he was the first caliph, he said, I am the successor to Muhammad. Okay? And people said, no, you're not, I am. And he said, okay, I'm going to kill you all. And then they all accepted it. Now, the point of this story is, have there been any of those? I mean, yes, there's been conflicts since with Shia and so forth. But by and large, the Sunni part has kept together ever since. So they did this one act of extreme violence. And in that Bedouin society, which was a lawless society, like the Scottish Highlands, like the Old West, it created a form of, if not peace, let's just say a degree of stability, which has held in that Islam still exists to this day. We saw, as I told you earlier, in the West, I recommend everyone read Steven Pinker's The Blank State, when he talks about, for example, the violence that, if you lived in the northeast of America in the 19th century, you could call, in inverted commas, call 911. There was law. There wasn't law in the South. So that's why Southerners were more violent, in inverted commas, so that they didn't have to be violent. So we see that and this has been in many cultures. And so we see that because Israel's taken a more hard line, even if Europe hates Israel, the Islamic world is kind of respecting it. So that's what the Kurds need to do. That's what all of these minorities need to do, and we need to support them. And if we do that, trust doesn't come into it. It's a military fact, okay? And it will put them in their tracks, okay?
Might is right, in other words.
Well, might is right to protect people who don't accept that might is right and want to live under real self-determination.
Okay, yeah. Mark Drucker suggests, has an unusual suggestion, expand the European Union, I think. Would that have helped?
I think the Arab empire is all in favour, Mark, of expanding the European Union, and they're all in favour of, as I say, a borderless entity. But speaking seriously, if there were to be ever a two-state solution, it would be like, of course, the European Union, of course. That land is too small for two states, if by states you mean with like this big wall down the middle. But of course, if it was like Belgium and the Netherlands, of course, you'd have a borderless entity where people could live where they want in Hebron, if you're a Jewish, or Arabs can go and live in Haifa or Tel Aviv. And because it works a bit like the European Union on the continent, it would work very well indeed. But the issue is not that. It's that as I said, it's this dominating mindset. And so it is about tackling it. Now, this book, let's be honest.
Yeah. Can you switch on your camera, actually? I think we've lost your...
Oh, sorry.
It's all right. Just it would be nice to see you again. What's happened? Lawrence, I think he's muted. Oh, there you go. Now I can't hear you. So, all right, I can see you now. I can see you.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, good.
Can see
Sorry,
and
what
hear
did you
you.
miss? Did I miss anything there? Or no? Okay. So yeah. Um, yeah, sorry, carry on. Next question. Sorry.
Yeah, no. I think we're probably time to wrap up now because we've gone over the hour and I don't want to hold you up. But
No,
would
no.
you, I think there was an amazing vision that you have, very well expressed. And I have to say that having read this book, it is very readable, and very entertaining actually in many ways. So I highly recommend it. Can you say something about your Substack, Daniel, and what you're
Yeah.
trying to achieve with that?
Okay. So we have on my Substack, it's called guerre, as in the French word. Can you see me now? Sorry. As in the French word for guerre, and shalom, which you can see now on the screen. So war and peace. And it obviously functions as a very, a place where I have lots of important writers from Yoav Gallant to Gary Kasparov and other people you may or may not have heard of who write for me, including a very senior Kurdish official. And I also publish books and that goes behind a paywall. And what I'm trying to do is create a free publishing house where people don't have to censor themselves. Of course, it's meant to be an intelligent space. This isn't the kind of Daily Mail behind the paywall, but we're not going to censor ourselves. We're going to actually say what the truth is. Now, I'm glad that Lynn brought this up because there are two ways, to purchase this book. So yes, you can publish it. You can purchase it on Amazon, and I know that will be given at the end of this talk. But on the other hand, you can, and I would prefer this, you subscribed as paid to Ger and Shalom Substack. You can do both. And if you do it to Amazon, you can give me, do a review. But there is a reason for this. You need to know the economics of writing a book and publishing. If I write on Substack and you give me a donation, not only do you have my book, other books I've written and books by other authors on a variety of subjects and articles, but I get 90% of the money you give me. If you go to Amazon, they've got to print it, they take half the cut. So even if all of you today were to purchase this on Amazon and two of you were to buy the Substack, the two of you on Substack would be giving me more money. So from just a purely economic way, although of course, if you can do both, fantastic. And I would obviously really support that. And I really want to say that this book is, as I said, is not about, and just to really come back on what people said, it's not about what they do, it's about what we do, how we act. We as in Israeli policy, but we as in Western people. We need to treat Arab people as human beings, and human beings means saying that they have agency, that they have the ability to make responsible decisions. That is the essence of the non-imperial mindset. Nations of lots of eyes, not one collective we. So what we really want to do here is say to Western people, wake up, this is an empire. And it will make a difference in time, okay? Because many Arab people, especially Arab women, are in prison because of this system, let alone the minorities.
Well, that was wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. By the way, the two figures on the front of your book are Neville Chamberlain, not Neville, sorry, Anthony Eden. Sorry, Anthony Eden and Gamal Abdel Nasser.
Yes.
Yeah, and
They
then
look
we
quite
have
similar, don't they?
Babel. Is it Babel in the background there?
Babel, the Babel Terrace.
Yeah,
In fact, you
Babel
can see
in the
the color.
background.
You really want to
Okay.
analyze the front cover. You got the blue and the
Yeah.
green. So you can
Oh,
decide what the blue could represent. It could represent a few different things. But anyway, I think it's got many different things on many different subjects. And as you say, there are bits which are a bit more polemical, and there are bits which are a bit more philosophical, and in the last chapter, a bit more poetic. But
yeah.
hopefully there's something for everyone. And please spread it, review it. But
Yeah.
it's the
Sure.
ideas that matter. And thank you so
Okay.
much, Lynn, for this.
I'm
Absolutely.
putting
Well,
in the
thank you
chat
very
now
much
details.
indeed.
Oh, Daniel, sorry, Lynn. I put details in the chat now of Daniel's Substack, and I'm also going to put the Amazon link as well. And as Daniel said, if you really enjoyed tonight, do both.
Yeah. There you go. Okay, well, thank you once again. Thank you, Daniel, for that. That was absolutely amazing. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. I think we will do as we usually do, and that's have our commercial break with an idea of what's coming up in the future. Just wanted to mention that this question of Middle Eastern minorities we're going to explore in greater detail. We've got an event coming up in September, chaired by Jonathan Spire, who is an expert on Syrian and Iraqi minorities and actually goes there quite a lot. So that's coming up. And also, our annual commemoration this year is going to focus on the Jews of Egypt, 70 years after Suez. So we're going to be talking about Anthony Eden and Nasser and the impact of Suez on the Jews of Egypt. So put that in your diaries, please. Okay, so this is the commercial break coming up. Where are we? Come on, Lawrence. That was last time. Okay, this is tonight. And this is our next one. So from Arabia Arabica, we traveled to Iraq and we mark the 85th anniversary of the Farhud. I've got an in-person talk on the Sassoons at JW3. Tickets selling fast. So quick, get your ticket. I'm going to be giving this lecture on the Great Spy, Eli Cohen, in also in June. And then there's a film which has never been seen before, a Libyan Jewish story of heroism. We go to Singapore in July. And that's it for the moment, but there'll be more in store. So once again, thank you very, very much, Daniel, and thank you everybody for joining us. And we hope to see you soon at our next event, which will be on the Farhud in 2 weeks' time.
All right, thank you very much.